Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we are going to do a before you buy or a should you buy for the DS223 from Synology. This is their brand new entry-level value ARM-powered 2-bay that gives you a little opening door into the world of DSM. And in today's video, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you might want to consider this brand new NAS for your home or business environment, and 5 reasons why you might want to sit on the fence a little bit longer and see if something else comes up, something a little bit more Intel powered, something a little bit more graphical, something a little bit shinier. So that's what we're going to do. We've already done a full review of this device. I think it probably came out a week ago at the time of recording. It's huge. It's really, really long. It covers loads and loads of stuff there. But if you've only come to learn about some quick points about this device, the good, the bad, and the ugly, this is the video for you. So let's crack on with number 1. So straight away, I've already covered it there, DSM or Disk Station Manager. Any Synology solution, the key word there is solution. Yes, it's a NAS, yes, it's hardware, but it is a combined hardware-software solution. And I think it would be very fair to say that in the world of network-attached storage, when it comes to software, Synology are kind of the dog's danglies. They've got a lot going for them, and their platform just covers the gamut. Not only has it got a lot of the standard stuff you'd be expecting there in terms of your storage, your backups and more, and a bunch of client apps, your mobile devices there for your client desktop Windows and Mac systems, for your iPad and your Linux and that. But on top of that, a whole complement of first-party applications, some of which are designed to allow you to utilize your data in a way that normally you'd use third-party applications, and the majority of them are there. The key word being the majority, because as this is an ARM powered CPU NAS system there, you're not going to get the full complement and range of DSM that you would on an Intel or an AMD based CPU like the DS93 Plus, like the DS920, 220 Plus, 3622, all of those. The reason being that ARM based processors are designed to be more efficient. So there is always the concern that a CPU that is designed for efficiency, in that a big instruction goes to the CPU and it's all compressed down so the CPU can action that with as little power use as possible for 24/7 use. There is always the concern that a more efficient NAS solution with the efficient hardware is going to ruin your DSM or indeed any NAS software experience. And I'm pleased to say that in terms of DSM, this runs pretty much everything. There are obviously a handful of apps you can't utilize, some of them more obvious than others. Things like you can't use Active Backup Suite, you know, with the Office 365 and Google Workspace add-ons there. That's not available here. Docker is not available. Virtual machine deployment is not available on there. Synology High Availability is not on there. So these kind of enterprisey, kind of more power-hungry processes aren't there, but you do have access to the collaboration suite, mail, chat, Office, Drive, all of that's on there. The surveillance application to support a bunch of cameras, that works fine too. If you want to utilize the hyper backup tool or the USB backup tool there, you can synchronize backup and communicate with cloud platforms, other NASs, and local if you choose, and all of that with DSM, which, although this device arrives with 2 gig DDR4 memory and a quad-core ARM processor, which is already in itself quite modest, it does run all of those very, very smoothly, and there's even support of multimedia as well, with the whole complement of Synology multimedia applications in there as well as playback of 4K, thanks to that CPU, and though transcoding is something we'll have to talk about later on. Carrying on with things on a software level, it's also worth highlighting that this doesn't just benefit from DSM despite its entry point status, it also supports the 3 things in modern storage, particularly Synology storage, that is very appealing to a lot of users. Number 1, it supports snapshots and snapshot replication. What that means is that you can have the system take kind of blueprint shots of your data in certain files and folders, and it can keep a historical record that you can scroll back to when you need to, if you need to restore the data to a previous state. Obviously you have to keep all of the little revisions and versions and snapshots in between, but you can still roll that back. But that's not enough. On top of that, you can also utilize snapshot replication to have those snapshots cloned elsewhere as well, which is always exceedingly beneficial too. This, despite its ARM architecture, does support that. On top of that, it also supports BTFS as well, something that a lot of users only till a couple of years ago knew that they could access or had the option to access on an ARM CPU level there. BTFS allows a lot of those snapshots to be created with a lower resource impact there, file self-healing there when inconsistencies are registered in data passing through, not unlike ECC, and just generally the system being a lot more efficient. Yes, compared to ext4. It doesn't have the legacy or things like, doesn't have the historical kind of research that's gone into ext4 or even ZFS, but it's still great to have BTRFS on an ARM-based NAS system. But that's not it. Also with this, thanks to Synology's own development, you have support for SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, a RAID configuration that allows you to mix and match the drives. Now, a number of you watching this will say, well, it's a 2-bay, who cares? Because you're right. Unlike traditional RAID, which when you combine multiple drives, it classes every single available drive as the smallest capacity. So if you put a 1 TB and a 10 TB, it will see them both as 1 TB. SHR creates a calculation based on the largest drive and make sure at least that much redundancy is available. Of course, on a 2-bay, if you put a 1 TB and a 10 TB, it's still calculating 10 TB of redundancy, ergo you're only seeing 2 TB again. So why the big hoo-ha about having it on a 2-bay without any expansion support on this either? Well, because that keyword, those keywords, entry level, means if you're going to go for this system as your first Synology and then a few years down the line end up graduating to something else, you can take that SHR out, pop it in a new Synology and then grow that SHR with its mixed drives. Whereas if you've gone for a traditional RAID, of a RAID 0 or a RAID 1 there, and you move it into a larger NAS, yes, you can graduate a RAID 1 to a RAID 5 or a RAID 5 to a RAID 6, but you can't mix and match the drives, and you'd have to reformat the whole array in a way that you wouldn't have to. So having SHR on an entry-level first Synology NAS, where later on you anticipate the potential to scale up to a larger system, is going to be very beneficial indeed. Carrying on the subject of storage media, it's also worth highlighting that unlike a lot of the more enterprisey, more, shall we say, fully featured Synology NASes in the last year and a half, this system does not have a kind of restricted compatibility and support list there. If you go to Synology's own compatibility pages, this pretty much supports the gamut in terms of WD Red, in terms of Seagate Iron Wolf, in terms of Synology's own drives, Toshiba, they're all on there. Indeed, inside this system, I have a couple of WD Red Pros inside there, which are doing absolutely great for a lot of my testing. But that's not the end of the road, because on top of that, you've also got support for third-party SSDs as well. And that compatibility list, despite feelings, reservations, and I would argue clues I've seen online that Synology are going to be rolling out a standard NAS class range of hard drives, we're not seeing this device arrive on the scene with restricted hard drive support and compatibility there, which is great to see. The only thing I will add is, and I mentioned this in the full review, that there are larger drives out there like this one. This is the the Seagate Iron Wolf Pro, the NT Series 20TB. This is not on the compatibility list, but I know darn well that it works within these systems. Now, of course, support, compatibility are different things, but a lot of the time when you look at the compatibility lists of Synology products, they all cap at 18 TB, despite them definitely working with 20 and 22 TB drives that we've tested thus far from WD and Seagate. Because Synology's own hard drives only go up to 18 TB at the time of recording, it seems like they're only capping them at 18 TB on their compatibility list. But weirdly, I imagine when they roll out a 20 and 22 TB, these other drives will magically appear. But that's a different story entirely. This is one that's a little bit more niche for some of you out there, but this device is low power, low noise. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a 2-bay. It should be low noise. And you're right, with such a low physical impact footprint in your home or business environment, one could have a huge surprise that it's going to be lowish noise. But it's the idea that this 2-bay I've got populated with Pro Series drives, despite its plastic external over a metal internal chassis and that rear fan taking up at least 60% of the rear panel there, it is low noise during utilization. Indeed, when it comes down to utilizing this with larger drives, you're going to hear the larger drives more than you're going to hear the system itself, and that fan is controllable, and you can not use the nocturne fan if you choose and swap that out for a silent fan, but it is very low noise. And thanks to that ARM based architecture and the memory inside that 2 gig soldered to the board, the result is that in terms of energy efficiency, it's going to be very high as well. So to have that full range of support in DSM and those apps and services that is comparable in many ways to that of more power-hungry 2-bays, the DS220 Plus, 723, that sort of thing, in this little compact package here for like 250, 300 nicker, that's pretty darn good for a low, noticeable NAS that's not going to make a big dent on your energy bill. And finally, this one again is a little bit niche, but it's something that was something of an issue when we were talking before about our DS723. But it's the fact that it's good that this device has 3 USB 3 ports on it. One on the front with that copy button there, lovely stuff. And on the rear there, we've got a couple more USB ports as well. That means you can attach plenty of external storage on this. Now, a lot of you might be watching this thinking, well, who cares? USB, it should have loads. That's the weird thing. When the DS723 Plus arrived, a noticeable higher price point than that, I might add, it's only got one on the front, nothing on the back, which to me was a real letdown, because it's, I know, and we will touch on this later in the video, Synology have been remiss in their USB support, but there's a lot of home users that are going to be jumping on board with this, that are going to have either loads of USB drives knocking around, or they're going to be using USB drives as logical backups for their systems within the USB copy tool, or they're going to be utilizing Plback up there. And a lot of those users that don't really want to buy another NAS so that their data is suitably backed up from the NAS, and they don't want to go out of their way to spend a bunch of money on cloud space, because let's face it, that was the whole point. They moved away from the cloud to get the NAS. A USB ends up being a very affordable way of adding a backup of either the content of the NAS or to work in either direction. There was plenty of tools to surface there. And again, if you use a UPS, you've still got 2 ports. So having those 3 ports on board there, it's nice to see that on a home NAS, when a lot of home NASs either have fewer USB ports or were still end up getting junked with a couple of USB 2s, which frankly on a system of this scale would be a waste of everyone's time. But it's not all good news. We've gone through the 5 things I quite like about the DS223 Plus, and you've got to keep it within that spectrum of being an affordable entry point NAS, but there are things about it that are going to rub you up the wrong way. So let's talk about the 5 reasons why you might want to sit on the fence and wait out for something perhaps a little better. This first point might change in the future, but right now at launch, and I reckon at least for a little while, it's worthy of note, and that is it doesn't have Plex. This is nothing to do with Synology. We can't critique them for this really, but the DS223 at launch does not have a Plex client app. Now, we saw this when the previous Realtek generation NASs started arriving with that RTD1296 processor there. It was about 6 months before we saw a Synology compatible Plex app. Now, Synology don't make that app. It's down to Plex themselves to create a ARM RTD 1619B compatible Plex client app that can be installed on this system. Now, it exists because there are TV media boxes out there with that CPU inside. It'll be a question of modifying that. Indeed, there may be industrial users out there going, oh, I might do it myself, why not? But still, nonetheless, if you're going for this NAS as a home multimedia server solution, you're not going to deal with transcoding, you're not going to deal with any HEVC licensing issues, that kind of stuff, and you were just looking for a nice simple 4K 1080p playback NAS in the corner there for your home to knock out media on your big TV, just know that Plex is currently not supported on this. MB is on there, Synology's own video station application is on there, as well as support of UPnP media and a DLNA media server, but right now Plex is not available for this, but hopefully that will change. Sticking with that subject of multimedia, and not just with Plex here, but we've got to talk about our HEVC H.265 problem there, and that is to do with compression and to do with playback and transcoding and conversions. Now, we talked about this at length in other videos, but most of the multimedia we own, particularly modern multimedia that's been released in the last 2 or 3 years, to get it from that big movie cinema experience all the way compressed down to what you use and watch at home, that compression technique has to be very, very efficient. Up until the last few years, it was predominantly H.264, which was a kind of largely open source, everyone's using it, no license needed, it's fine, means of it having that compressed media. And most of the downloads that you would have done, or even attached files with Blu-rays and stuff, would have been in that format. But in the last 4, maybe 4.5 years, we've seen an increase in the more powerful and definitely more capable compression technique known as H.264 or HEVC, highly efficient video codec. Now, that was designed by basically a bunch of corporate bigwigs that got together, invested in it to produce this compression technique, and unfortunately that has led to licensing behind it. Now, the license for it. Some devices you buy have the license included. This does not. Some devices you buy will give you, on the client side, that is your TV, your phone, your console, whatever, have the option to either add a license, which can, it's a couple of nicker, or to use the hardware on your client hardware, the thing you're watching on, to convert a file that it is in H.265 or HEVC into a format that it can watch. However, if you don't have either of those options open to you and you own a lot of HEVC based media, this device will struggle to play that file natively. It doesn't have an HEVC license on board, and if you are playing that file and you're not using things like VLC or Kodi natively, which can have kind of compressive workarounds, your HEVC license in both 1080p and 4K will push this box very hard indeed. When we tried to play even some of our lower end 1080p HEVC files at just 1.5, 3 megabit bit rate, it really did grind to a halt, and a lot of that is because of that ARM based processor. They're having to deal with these larger, more complex instruction that transcoding and conversion consists of. Again, it can do it, but it just basically maxes the whole CPU out to do it. And then if you get to more aggressive multimedia than expected to do it, you're just going to hit a wall. And I'm not just talking about MB here. When we deal with the native application, unless your client device, again in my case it was a PC, had the HEVC license, it was not playing the game. So do bear that in mind if you're going for this system, with or without Plex if it arrives, that support of transcoding and conversions from HEVC into more supported media, if you do not have client-side support or client-side hardware conversion supported, are just not going to be possible with the DS223. Heading back to those USB ports, of course, we got to talk about, I kind of alluded to it earlier on, but USB support on DSM-7 has really taken a bit of a kick in this last year and a half. When DSM 6.2 was knocking around, I think it's going to be a year and a half, 2 years ago now, it had quite a wide-ranging support of USB device. And indeed, a device like this with 3 USB ports, even this or its predecessor, the DS218, that had those USB 3 ports, not only could you use external drives, but you could use wireless adapters, USB Wi-Fi dongles. You could use network adapters to add additional network ports. This has only got the one on there. And then on top of that, you also had things like digital TV tuners there and more. It wasn't just about storage. But when DSM-7 rolled out, USB support got really pulled back, and it ended up being pretty much UPSs, storage, assigning them to a VM or Docker, something that's not an option here because it doesn't support those services. And that's really it. And that's a real crying shame when you're getting a device like this that's got 3 USB ports there for you to play with, and there's not a huge degree of compatible things you can use. And now, again, with those USB ports there, it's worth highlighting that there are unofficial mods out there. There are little fixes that people have created that not only allow you to use network adapters, but also 2.5 and 5 GBE adapters as well. But these are non-official. And if you want to continue installing your official updates for either security or stability packets, as well as updates to software and apps, there's every possibility that installing those will undo any modifications that you've made to use non-supported USB devices. So ultimately, it is just the kind of downfall of USB support in DSM-7 that we are critiquing here as a reason you might want to stay on the fence on this one. This next point I appreciate. Again, you've got to look at it through the kind of lower end, affordable, entry level range that this device is going for. But I'm not, I have to highlight the fact that it only has one GBE port, and all of the USB ports are like USB 3.1, USB 3.2 Gen 1, so 5 gigabit, when a lot of other brands now are rolling out USB 10 gig ports and are rolling out dual 1 GBE ports on their value series, or are rolling out 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports on their value series. Now, again, the Synology product here is a combined hardware-software solution, and it's been a well-established fact that with Synology products, you're paying, of every $100 you're paying, I would argue at least 60, maybe even 65 of that is going more towards the software than the hardware. So understandably, I can see why Synology might not want to blow everyone's minds when it comes to the hardware on the value series NAS. I hate seagulls. Where are you? But still, nonetheless, it's worth highlighting that other brands are providing better hardware at this price point right now than Synology. And I think, although I'm personally not too critical of the level of hardware ports and connections this arrives with, I know there are a lot of users out there that would have expected this to arrive with better connections than it has. Indeed, to go and rewind time a little bit, and we remove that front panel, I didn't touch on this in the review, see that little line there? That little line, that's because the original chassis design that this had back in, I believe, the DS216 generation, maybe even the 214, this device arrived, this casing I should say, used to arrive with an SD card slot. You could put your SD cards in there if you're a photographer, you've done your shoot, you get back, you pop in the SD card and back up. That slot's not there anymore. And with that drop in USB supported devices, it gets even worse. So it's little things like that about small features being removed that it's just annoying for some users. And it's just the fact that that little line still exists there where there used to be an SD card slot and there isn't anymore, it's just systematic of the brand itself perhaps sitting on its laurels a little bit too much when it comes to hardware, despite this being a value release. Which brings us to my last point, which arguably some might say is a little bit more ambiguous, and that comes down to a follow-up to the DS220 Plus series. Now, the DS223 is the follow-up to the DS218, 4 or 5 years refresh that's, you know, between those two releases there. But in that interim, we have seen a couple of releases in the DS Plus series for 2-bay for that mid-range tier, notwithstanding also the more power-hungry, businessy prosumer 723 and 720 in that meantime too. So right now, as we get towards the end of winter and into spring of 2023, I'll say straight away, again, there's little whispers, little bits floating around of a new kind of home multimedia-esque 2-bay entering the field, whether that is the DS223 Plus or it's a renamed new series. Again, I'm not getting enough to concretely choose one or the other, but it's definitely one of those. And right now, a lot of users looking at the DS223 because of the whole movement towards Ryzen on their SMB Compact 2 and 4-bay solutions that I referred to there. A lot of users may be thinking about this for multimedia, but then also thinking there's a big old gap in Synology's portfolio in need of a refresh, and the DS220 Plus is now approaching that 3 years old mark. So it'll be interesting to see if a new unit arrives, and that for me is one of the more compelling factors for home and small group users why they might not want to opt for the DS223. Because I am convinced there is going to be a new device on the horizon for you multimedia users that may well be a little bit more appropriate towards you. But this has been 5 reasons why you might want to go for the DS223 and 5 reasons why you might want to sit on that fence just a mite bit longer. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, let me know in the comments. Click like if you did, and click subscribe to learn more as new products arrive on the market from not just Synology but all the brands, and we find out just what this device is capable of. If you need help with your next NAS solution, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares, the big blue button on the right hand side of that page, or the free community support forum with me, Eddie, and other members of the NAS community answering your questions. If you've enjoyed the video, please, if you were going to shop from Amazon and if this video has helped you, use the links in the description to take you there. Anything you buy, once that link takes you to Amazon, it doesn't cost you anything to use, and once you get there and buy something, then we get a kickback which helps us carry on doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.